Welcome back. Going into this season, I don't think the Boston Bruins envisioned the kind of year that they've had, and I will give Don Sweeney props for selling players when he could. The optics of the way that Marchand's left the team, I don't know if that gets better if Marchand wins a cup with Florida either. It is going to be really interesting to see how the playoffs go for Florida and what the Bruins do once we get to the offseason. So, looking at their lineup, and this is from Daily Faceoff, where there was some guesswork going into today's games. Geeky, Zaka, and Pasternak on the first line. That's not an awful first line, but it does show that some selling has gone on. Tufty in that second line spot. Is he even playing today? Anyways, Lindholm and Poitras. I'm really a big fan of Poitras. I think that he's got a lot of potential. Kepke, Middlestad, and Letary. I do like the addition of Middlestad. I think that if he ends up being that third line center, that should be an okay spot for him. And then Beecher, Kuznetsov, and Kastelik. Also worth mentioning, Fraser Minton, who they picked up. One thing that it does feel like Don Sweeney understood was that depth down the middle is important, and they've had some struggles there. It's something I've talked about plenty, how Bergeron and Krejci retire, and they never really replace them. Now, obviously, Middlestad, Kuznetsov, Minton, none of these guys are going to replace Bergeron or Krejci. But having a committee of 1 through 4 that can do the job is important, and there's the chance that maybe they may figure something out in the offseason where they can improve their depth down the middle. Now, on the blue line, things are thin because McAvoy and Lindholm are, of course, injured. Zadorov and Peak, Lowry and Yoki Haru, Wotherspoon and Mitchell. This is a top 6 on the blue line that is lacking in terms of a power play point man, and this is a team that really needs to get back to some good health next season, because this season they've kind of said, well, we're done. The moves that were made at the deadline make it clear that Boston's in the midst of going through what Don Sweeney's calling a retool, not a rebuild, and he's probably not wrong. This is a team that might be able to rearm and get back into the race quickly. The goaltending tandem of Swayman and Korpisalo has been talked about plenty. I will talk about them again later on in this video. So they did add a first-round pick in 2026. They also potentially added another in the Marchand trade. It's a second-round pick that can become a first. And they have 7 picks this year. This is a team that had probably needed to start getting more draft picks a couple of years ago, but they had a really good regular season. They had fantastic, one of the best regular seasons ever, if not the best regular season ever, depending on how you measure things, because yes, they got the all-time points and wins, but if you look back at the Montreal Canadiens back in the day, there wasn't overtime, so it is kind of an apples to oranges argument. One thing that's been said is that there are some contracts on this team that people aren't all that happy with, and the finger gets pointed at Don Sweeney. I was concerned before the season started about Lindholm and Zadorov. I've talked about it. I was glad the Canucks didn't sign these contracts, because it'd be almost $13 million between Elias Lindholm and Zadorov. And if you follow the Canucks, where do they have $13 million in space for 2 contracts? So Lindholm signed till 2031. I don't think there's a market out there, even if Boston in the offseason said, all right, we're going to look at moving him. Zadorov is signed through 2030. Zadorov's led the league in penalties, which, I mean, as a Boston fan, it's noticeable. I don't feel like he's been as bad over the second half of the season as he was early in the season, but maybe it's just something I've gotten used to. Zadorov can be a very effective defenseman, a very good top 4, but he has to stay out of the box, and he has to make sure he's on the right side of things rather than taking those penalties. Swayman's $8.25 million cap hit has been talked about a lot this season. He is signed through 2032. One of the reasons this video's been put together the way that it has is that watching the start of the Boston-Tampa game and hearing, well, Boston, Swayman's numbers are down. He's one of the reasons why they're not in a playoff spot. And I'm like, okay, early in the season, I could make that argument. Yes. His recent play, I would argue, no. Is Swayman living up to that contract? No. But I don't think he's the reason they're not in a playoff spot at this point in time. When we look back to last season, the record was 47, 20, and 15. Absolutely fantastic regular season. Since then, exits include, and there are a couple others, but Marchand being the big one, of course, DeBrusk, Frederick, Van Riemsdyk, Heinen, Shattenkirk, Jesper Boquist, Ullmark, and of course Charlie Coyle leaving as well. The Ullmark one is one that stings. So we'll go over to the moves that Sweeney's made that have irritated Boston fans this season, myself included at points in time. Starting off with Ullmark being traded before the Swayman signing was made. It put Boston behind the eight ball. You had to sign Swayman because you've already moved Ullmark. You lose the whole goalie hug, which, I mean, it's a goalie hug. It's not necessarily a big deal. But the tandem they had with Ullmark and Swayman, there was something special there. And with the move to trade Ullmark and bringing in Korpisalo, Korpisalo's not going to be the same goaltender Ullmark's been. The funny thing is, I don't know that Ullmark's been as good for Ottawa as he was in Boston. I don't know if it's benefited Ullmark or Boston with the trade. But at any rate, they decided we're going to pay one goaltender and we're going to trade another, and they decided the goaltender they'd pay would be Swayman, and they would trade Ullmark. Now, they had the public spat with the media and Swayman before they got Swayman signed, which is still weird to me. And when Sweeney was disappointed that Swayman wasn't at training camp without a contract, it was bewildering because players generally will not go to training camp without a contract. It is something that I can't remember seeing. If a player doesn't have a contract, they don't go to training camp. They're not going to go to training camp. How many times have we seen a guy get hurt during camp? You don't want to get hurt during camp and you don't even have a contract. So, yeah, it was weird. Then they signed Swayman, and people, of course, got mad at the contract. The Lindholm and Zadorov contracts, people talking about that from the beginning. I think with Lindholm, they looked at his play in the playoffs against Vancouver, or it's just the fact that it had been rumored for at least a year that they were interested in Lindholm before Vancouver got him. And maybe they didn't see that Lindholm is not the player now that he was, say, 5 years ago. I think Lindholm was good. I've seen people saying Lindholm was a passenger on that line with Johnny Gaudreau. I think it was Johnny Gaudreau and Tkachuk. And I know Monahan, there was like the four of them, but Lindholm was on that line in there as well. I don't think he was a passenger. I think Lindholm was very good, but at this point in time, he is not the same player. He is not the same player. And he had a good run with Vancouver in the playoffs, but was it a worthy of the $7.75 million a year contract till 2031? No. I have some issues with how the Canucks have done things. I don't have an issue with that negotiation going the other way where they're like, we can't pay that amount. The trading of Marchand and the return is something that's a bit of a head scratcher. Now, reportedly, Emily Kaplan talking today during the game saying that Marchand wanted to go to Florida, which is weird. It is so weird that in this day and age, you can have these blood feuds in the playoffs, and these guys are like, well, if I need to be traded, I'd like to go over to that team I detested last year, please. It's different. It feels like that's something that's changed in hockey from the way things were way back in the day when I was a kid. There were certain teams that a player would be like, yeah, I don't want to go there. But at this point, that's where Marchand wanted to go. Apparently, they couldn't work out any kind of extension with him. They even had a 3-year offer at one point, and they couldn't come to terms on a cap hit. I'm very surprised they couldn't figure that out. And I will be very interested to see if we hear what Marchand was looking for, what the dollar figure was, and what Boston was countering with. I would prefer to have seen Marchand finish his career in Boston. Now, the second round pick that could become a first, sure, that could end up being a good player, but I think there's something... There's just something that I like in hockey about a player spending their whole career in one place when they are a legend for that team. It has never sat right with me as a Dallas fan that Modano finished his career in Detroit. That has never worked for me. And let's just go back a couple of years with Boston. If Boston wasn't having that historic season, let's just say that the year they're having now is the year they would have been having then. Would they have traded Bergeron? Would they have actually traded Patrice Bergeron if they'd been in this position a couple of years ago? It's kind of, off to think about. Like, Bergeron retiring as a Bruin, that's the way it should be, and I kind of feel that way with Marchand as well. Although if he does win a Stanley Cup in Florida, do Boston fans congratulate him if he wins a cup in Florida? It's going to be interesting. I'm going to be really fascinated to see. And then there are people looking at their upcoming schedule. Oh, Boston plays Florida soon. Marchand's out. Marchand probably won't be playing for at least a couple of weeks here. One thing to keep an eye on is cap space. This is a team that has $28.8 million, a little bit over $28.8 million in cap space this summer, according to Puckpedia. It's interesting. They do have some also interesting restricted free agents. Geeky's a restricted free agent. I think he's warranted a raise. He's been very good for them. Beecher. Beecher is probably not going to warrant a raise, but Beecher's one to keep an eye on going forward. Huznadinov, been a fan of his for a while, but again, not a big raise there. And Lowry. Lowry will be interesting. Lowry's very, very good offensively. Defensively, maybe a little bit of a misadventure here and there. Sure. There's sort of a Torrey Krug vibe in the way that he plays at times, but I like Lowry. I like Krug as well. But we'll see what his next contract looks like. And then Yoki Haru, who was acquired from Buffalo, is an unrestricted free agent this summer. So what he's doing in Boston is basically auditioning for a job for next season. And I don't know if Boston's going to keep him around, but they might. So one thing that bewildered me this season was the firing of Jim Montgomery. They were 8-9-3 under Montgomery, and a lot of Boston fans defended the firing. I still don't understand it. Under Joe Sacco, they've been 20-19-5, so the record hasn't really improved under Sacco from where it was under Montgomery. And it feels like while Montgomery's moved on to St. Louis, who could not hire him fast enough after Boston fired him, Montgomery's got St. Louis playing some better hockey than what they were playing before he got there, and I don't think Montgomery was the problem. It is one of those examples to me of a general manager going, okay, this team isn't doing what I thought it would, so I'm going to fire the coach, when this team wasn't a Stanley Cup contender at the start of the year anyways. You look at the roster they had at the start of the year, they were not a Stanley Cup contender. Maybe a playoff contender, sure, but not a Stanley Cup contender. So they're 28th in goal scoring per game, and that is not necessarily going to get better because you've got Pastrnak. I mean, Zacha can put the puck in the net, but then you've got a lot of question marks when you're looking at this lineup going forward for the rest of this season. They're 22nd in goals against per game. So going back to the amount of cap space they have this summer, if they're going to bring somebody in, so the idea of a retool means you can go out and get somebody. If they're going to do that, you've got to think that goals for, goals against, both of these need to be improved. There's this guy, Mitch Marner. Yeah. Mitch Marner's a pending UFA, and maybe Boston could work for Marner. If you put Marner on a line with Pastrnak, how many goals does Pastrnak score? I think it'd be a lot. I really do. Then you got Sam Bennett. Imagine if Sam Bennett signed in Boston after leaving Florida, and Bennett would work as a Bruin. I'm just going to say it. I think it would work. Ryan Lindgren, if they're looking for a defensive defenseman on the third pairing. And I figured I'd put Brock Besser's name on the board too, because Besser, he could work. They do need a top six scoring winger. I think Besser coming over could work. There's definitely been a pipeline of players between Vancouver and Boston for a long time, for as long as I've watched hockey. So maybe that could work. And with the amount of cap space they have and the fact that, I mean, outside of Geeky, they don't really have anybody who's going to be that expensive to hold on to. They may very well be able to make that splash. It would probably only be one big name free agent, but if they did bring in a Mitch Marner on a 7-year contract or Brock Besser on a 7-year contract, who knows? Maybe you put Besser with Lindholm and maybe that works during the regular season. You never know. Now, one thing to keep an eye on is the draft lottery. So currently, they coming into today, they had a 5% chance of drafting first, and that will send chills through some hockey fans who'd rather not see Boston, their first year out of the playoffs, get a top prospect. They have a 64.4% chance of drafting ninth. So more than likely they draft ninth. I'm just glad they're drafting in the top 10 for a change. This is a team that I think needs more young, talented players. They have some good young players, but they need that top six guy. They need another center, and I think they need another top young defenseman coming up as well. Eventually, when your team's at the top for so long, which Boston has been, and they've been drafting late, eventually it's going to wear down, and you're going to have an aging roster, and you're going to age out of the playoffs. Now, for all of the discussion about Swayman, according to Money Puck, goals saved above expected, he is below even, meaning he has allowed more goals than expected. 1.1 is the number currently for Swayman. Korpisalo has a negative 3.7, meaning he's allowed 3.7 goals above expected. So Swayman has been the better of the two goaltenders. And the last time I looked at Ullmark's numbers in Ottawa, they were positive, but not by a lot. Last time I looked, I think it was like 0.5 or 0.3, somewhere in that region. And so I do wonder, like, if they hadn't traded Ullmark, if they'd kept Ullmark and Swayman together, if they had signed Swayman sooner, right? These kinds of things. Who knows what might have happened? But the Boston Bruins, this upcoming offseason will tell us whether the retool mentioned by Don Sweeney is going to just happen over the summer and they're quickly going to try to turn things around. This is where the draft lottery comes in handy. If they end up winning that draft lottery and they draft first, and I expect them, I don't know why I was saying fifth, first, I expect them to, if they draft first, maybe they do look at picking up a free agent. Maybe they say, you know what, we lucked out here. And yeah, hockey fans won't be happy if they get the number one draft pick their first year of the playoffs. Just saying, will not make people very happy. Whether it's a great draft or whatever the draft is. In fact, I'd go further. If they draft them in the top two, people won't necessarily be happy. But I do expect their record to slide a bit between now and the end of the season. And maybe they end up with a better spot than ninth. Maybe they end up fifth or sixth, something like that. But Boston needs a little bit of something. Will we see them rearm this offseason? Or will they continue the process of moving out veterans, bringing in the young guys, and understanding there'll be some more pain for at least 1 year to come? Let me know your thoughts. Do you think Boston going the retool route's right, or do you think a full-on rebuild's needed? And keep in mind, I'm not a fan of just strip everything down rebuilds. I'm not a big fan at all. And I think with some of the contracts they have here, they really can't do that. So even if they wanted to, they really can't. But let me know your thoughts regarding the Boston Bruins. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.